Breaking everything.
Breaking everything. All right. Let's start.
Episode 4.
Episode 4.
The Hour in the Day.
Hour in the Day.
Which was, I think, better than episode 3.
Yeah.
I liked it better. There was, at least, things happened. I don't know. I feel like episode 3 is just slow.
Yeah, it was slow. But there's going to be one of those, maybe 2 in every season. They're necessary for the plot.
Of course. And we're still early on in the show.
Yeah.
But,
I've noticed that each episode so far, the major theme overall, and even the episode names have to do with time.
Oh yeah, I never noticed that.
Yeah.
You're thinking, Cameron.
This episode was called The Hour in the Day. The one before that was The Big Never.
The Big Never. Yeah.
What was before that?
I don't know. I don't have the other ones listed. I'll take your word for it.
Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye was the second episode.
Okay, it's that time.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right, so episode 4 starts in the 80s, and they're at a church now, which immediately brought me back to season 1 because those who saw season 1, that was very religion themed.
Religious cult theme, which is they're kind of touching back in on it again.
Yeah, this episode really goes into the religion a bit, and so Hayes and West go and they see this priest, and he's just talking to about 15, 20 kids there, and you immediately get the vibe, and West is kind of giving him a glare, which he tends to do. Yeah. But he's nice enough. He speaks with them, and you see all these communion photos.
Mm-hmm. You see all the communion photos, which is why they went to the church in the first place. Because, as we mentioned in the end of episode 3, you see Will in his first communion pose in the same position that they found his body in.
Yeah. With his eyes closed. With his eyes closed.
So they go back to the church and they see all these pictures on the wall of kids in that praying position, like Will. And the priest says he likes to take their pictures on their first communion. But Will is the only photo where his eyes are closed. Yeah. So he really looks like it's just a picture of Will dead, positioned. Yeah, and so Roland and Hayes think that that's weird too. So they ask him about it. And he says, he must have blinked when the picture was taken. But it's weird that Will's the only one that has his eyes closed out of all the kids on that wall. Plus, you can't look back at the photo. This is the 80s, so they can't directly look back.
Yeah, no. They were just checking their iPhone, like, oh, wait, you blinked. We got to do this again. No, that doesn't happen. So the priest gives us some good information. He talks about Julie and says that she was excited to see her aunt, which we hadn't heard about an aunt yet.
Yeah, this was the first time we hear of an aunt.
Yeah, it makes you think maybe it was that woman who they were meeting, I guess, or with the brown sedan. Remember, there was the black man.
Oh, yeah. It could be the woman in that brown sedan. I didn't think of that. Also, we also don't know what aunt, and does she have any relation to Uncle Dan?
Yeah, we don't know that. We do find out more about Uncle Dan later on, but we won't get to that yet. Yeah. First, the priest, they ask him about the dolls, and he says they're chaff dolls? Chaff? Not chafing, no, chafing.
Chaff
doll. He says a nice, sweet old woman named Patty Favor makes them. So that's their next big lead. And then this is where they go to see this woman. But I like how the scene transitions at the end after they're not talking to the priest. It's just Roland in the car, and he's like, I don't like him.
I don't like him.
And he's
like, I don't trust any man that chooses celibacy for life. And he says everybody's fucking somebody.
Yeah.
But that's all priests.
Yeah.
So I wonder if he just has some sort of fear for priests.
Yeah. So now they get to this old woman, and you can see she's kind of racist. Like she
uses
wants
terms
to talk to Roland and doesn't really.
Yeah, she uses some weird terms. They ask about the dolls that she makes, and she says she was selling them at a farm fair, some sort of fair.
Yeah, some sort of fair they have. So she mentions that a man came and bought 10 of them, and he's a black man with a dead eye.
Dead eye, like he had a cataract or something.
Yeah.
And she kept saying, "He's like you. He's like you," pointing to Hayes.
Yeah.
So she was using some racist terms.
Yeah.
And she said he bought them, or the guy with the dead eye said he bought them for his 10 nieces and nephews.
And she says that he lives over by the tracks in Davis Junction.
Mm-hmm.
So I think now they cut back to the 90s, and this is where Hayes comes in, and he's happily talking to Amelia about the case, and she's not having it because he shut her down in the last episode.
In the last episode, when she was excited about the case, he was like, don't act excited about something that's caused so much burden on this family and so much terrible thing. But he comes in and he's happy to tell Amelia that he's working with West again on this case, and so they get into a little spat, and they argue, and you think it's going to escalate because Amelia walks away. She doesn't want to have this argument, and she goes into the bedroom, and Hayes follows her, but first he stops and asks the kids if they're okay in the living room, and he turns the volume of the TV up so you know that there's going to be some loud arguing when they get into the bedroom. And they start arguing, and it's not too loud, but he grabs her arm, and I was like, please do not hit her. I like him so much. Please don't hit her.
Yeah,
and he doesn't. He actually goes in the complete 180 and says, if you do something, I'll cry.
She's like, what are you gonna do?
And he said,
he's like,
I'll cry. Not I'll hit you, but he 180 and becomes very vulnerable.
So then they kind of get into this discussion, and then all of a sudden they are fucking.
I literally go, they argue, and then they fuck it out.
Yeah, they fight. He's about to cry, and then they fight.
Should I bleep this? Yeah. If you're watching this episode, I mean, you're going to take our language anyway, whatever.
Yeah, you can do it.
So now it goes back to the 80s, and they take the lead that Patty Faber, the woman who makes the dolls, told them about, and they go to this poor part of town. It's more like a trailer park. And they go to the first store, and the liquor store.
So after they get the hint from the liquor store, they go into this trailer park, and then he goes up to a Mr. Whitehead.
Yeah.
Who is a black man with a dead eye. It matches their description.
Mm-hmm.
They calmly go and approach to ask him questions.
He's not having it.
No, he immediately kind of calls in everybody in the trailer park.
Yeah, plays the race card. Says, two white kids go missing. You immediately come to the black guy.
So they're trying to pin it on a black man. And then all of a sudden there's shots fired, and they have to run into his house. And things just escalate. He's not helping.
No, he's like, you know how many black men there are with dead eyes like me? Yeah. So now that lead kind of goes out the window.
And then they're back in the car, and then they have another discussion about race, where Hayes asks Wes, like, what does he say? Like, would you have shot anybody if it was?
He said. Roland said he would have had no hesitation if it was white people that shots would have been fired, but he has more hesitation because they were all black.
Yeah. He said because it was black people gave him even more pause.
Mm-hmm.
If a group of rowdy white people were screaming at him, busting up his car, he probably would have shot without even thinking, which makes you think.
And then Hayes asks Roland because they vandalized his car. Remember, they vandalized the police car?
He's got a big crack in his windshield now.
Yeah, and so Hayes says, can we just write this down as two unknown assailants? And Roland is kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
So
they kind of a dead end where you just have some drama for really no reason.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're back in 2015 and back in the police department. And Hayes is trying to look at old case notes, and this is where you see his son Henry. He's apparently a cop or detective.
Yeah, he's a detective. His son Henry.
In his father's footsteps there. Mm-hmm. Now this is where he has to find Roland, and they don't know where Roland is. They have not heard from him.
The son's hesitant. He doesn't want his dad to do this case anymore, but Hayes is adamant, and he says, I need his memory.
Yeah, I need his memory.
Which gets me excited because now we think we might find Roland in 2015 and see where that goes. So at this point, Attorney General Kint and who they call the Major come in to talk about what they're going to do now that they've reopened the case in the 90s, and now that Hayes is working with West's team.
Yeah, and they kind of immediately attack and criticize Hayes.
Yeah.
Which, again, goes back to we don't know what happened in the 80s, but clearly something happened with Hayes.
Yeah, Kent is especially a prick to Hayes, saying that Roland really stuck his neck out to get him this job, and he says you should use this opportunity to redeem an unfortunately stunted career.
Yeah,
which is really like effed up.
Yeah, well, basically they say that the point of this task force is the mandate of this task force is to vindicate the original conviction of the murder of Will.
Yeah.
And after they leave, Hayes turns to West and says, "We're not really going to do any of that, are we?" And he's like, "No." So,
no, I didn't plan on it.
Yeah. So clearly they still have their own motivations here to try to find who actually did it.
And then it goes back briefly into the 80s. I'm just going to mention this quickly, where Hayes and West are at the church again, and the priest is being cooperative and having his congregation be fingerprinted to help them out, and if their congregation has any tips or info on the case. And then the priest just mentions like 2 or 3 times that he wishes that Hayes would go into confession, but Hayes is like, nah, bruh.
West has a good line though with all the mothers around the church.
Oh yeah.
West turns to Hayes, "There's some serious ass over here. I gotta get back to church.
I gotta get back to church."
And then he immediately goes and hits on him. So West is fun. Like Roland's really fun.
He is funny.
Really funny.
He is funny.
He has like kind of like comic breaks in this series.
Yeah, and he seems to be the only one that can make Hayes laugh.
Yeah. The only time you see Hayes smile or laugh is something that Roland says.
Yeah.
The relationship is funny.
Yeah, the relationship is super funny. Okay, so then it goes to a dinner date with Amelia and Hayes, and this seems to be the first time they have a date. And
it was a long scene, but I didn't really get anything out of it.
It's long, and as of right now in the series, it seems like their interactions together don't have any influence on the story besides just showing their relationship. I don't know if it's going to be something later, but as of right now, I feel like they're pointless scenes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You're establishing their relationship.
Yeah. But I don't know if their relationship is pertinent to the main story.
Yeah. We'll find out. But then they go to Roland pulling into this bar, and he finds Father Tom Purcell drunk in the back. Said he swung at the owner. Apparently, the owner was fucking Lucy,
his wife, yeah.
And so West takes him home, and they kind of have a little heart-to-heart. Tom says that he can't go home. He can't be there. He can't sleep there. He said, "I just want to die all the time." Yeah, that's tough. Like,
and he even calls, in just referencing West's partner, he calls Hayes the N-word.
Yeah.
And then immediately
West goes right into him about it. And then later on, Tom, after
he feels super remorseful, and he's like, "Don't tell him I called him that." And that's like the first time you see any like backlash from him. Yeah. He so Roland drives him to his house and lets him sleep on the couch.
Yeah. So now in the 90s again, Roland's speaking to all these officers along with Hayes in the back. And they have a whiteboard titled Julie Purcell. They have a few things on there. They have Uncle Dan O'Brien. They're trying to find him. Robbery statements. At this point, Lucy's
died an overdose.
We know it's an overdose?
Yeah.
Oh, that's that part. So they're trying to find Julie. And
there's a small like part that I noticed when Wes is giving like out information to the other detectives that are going to help work on the case, and Hayes goes to mention something and Roland cuts him off, kind of like, let me take this, like you're kind of on rocky water as it is, so let me lead this investigation kind of
thing. Hayes tries to say something and Roland's like, "Yeah, you in the back."
Yeah. he takes it as like a joke and then raises his hand. So then Roland's like, "Yeah, you in the back."
Yeah. So they don't know where the cousin O'Brien is. They do mention that they say back in the 80s, everything pointed to Julie being dead.
Yeah.
So it was a shock that she showed up with her prince after that robbery.
Yeah.
So, and they're adamant on Hayes is like, we're not putting a word out here if we find anything like the Halloween stuff from last time.
Like in the other episode that we said when General Kent did a national broadcast saying and gave out the map, and Hayes and Roland were not happy about that, so they don't want to tip anybody off again. Now we're back in 2015. Hayes
finds the director of this series. Her name's Eliza. I did have it in my notes.
Oh,
I got it. I got you.
Got it. Okay.
So clearly he wants to talk more to her.
Mm-hmm. They have, when he first goes back to see his son earlier in the episode, he says, "Have you seen Eliza? Like, why hasn't he had the interviews recently?" And the son says, "No, I've never seen her, or I haven't seen her around." But it doesn't sound.
He doesn't really want.
Yeah, he doesn't really
he wants
want it, but it doesn't sound genuine.
Yeah.
Also, when he goes in this scene, when he goes to visit Eliza at the hotel after finding her, they have a scene of him. It shows like from the side table of the bed, and there's 2 wine glasses, but she's the only one in the room. So there's a rumor that his son is seeing Eliza.
That's a good one. I didn't catch that one.
Yeah,
I noticed the wine glasses, but now the way that you mentioned that, he mentioned her before, kind of passively, and then good job. I like that one.
But his son has a wife.
Oh fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Shit.
So we don't know what's going on there, but
I take away the pound. That wasn't good.
Maybe something. But even Hayes, when he walks in, he says, "Am I interrupting something?" And she says, "Oh no, it's just me."
Yeah. But whatever. But so he's like really adamant about talking more. He's like, we haven't addressed the end of our efforts in the 80s, more or less even the 90s, which he says, which was more harm than anything.
Mm-hmm.
So now I kind of want to know what the hell happened.
Yeah, what happened in the 90s investigation that brought more harm. So she asks him several times, "Are you sure you're not on the case again? Are you sure you're not on the case again?" But he just
she doesn't want to give up her info.
No. And so she gave him a little bit, and that was pictures of Uncle Dan O'Brien's remains that they found in the ground.
He said that he had went missing in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess when they were looking for him, they find him and then he goes missing again, or they just don't find him at all.
Yeah, so that's the only information she gives him.
So you know he's dead now.
In 2015.
In 2015.
Yeah. And then he asks her not to tell his son about the visit because he knows his son's upset about the interview in the first place. Yeah. But we also don't know his son's involvement with this girl now. Yeah.
So going back to the 80s, the thing I bit like Kent is at it again. He's on Donahue, like talking about this thing, and they say he's saying, "Oh yeah, he wants attorney general." He's just a prosecutor at this point, which we know that he got attorney general.
Yeah.
And but the big thing here, these other cops come in while Hayes and Roland are watching this, and they say they got hit on the bike, and they have Freddie Burns. So they have Freddie Burns, and
is one of the teenagers we haven't mentioned since the first episode.
Yeah. And I guess his prints were on the bike, which we knew because we saw a quick one in the first episode of him like playing
riding
with
the bike. Yeah.
So now they're going to go and talk to them. They have all 3 of them right in the room.
Interrogation room, yeah. But both Hayes and West go into the interrogation room with Freddie Burns specifically, and tell them that they found his prints on the bike. Ask him what he's doing, and he seems terrified.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't like. I don't understand why they're pressing him so hard. Like, Hayes mentions a vivid rape scene again of how Freddie's going to be raped in prison, like he did in the previous episode.
Gets on him for that. Yeah. Like, why do you keep bringing that up?
Yeah. But it doesn't seem like he needs to be pressed that hard. I don't think these teenagers had anything to do with it.
No, and Hayes even says he's like he'll probably end up in jail in a few years, but it
won't be for this. Yeah. But he says the reason his prints were on the bike is that Will came to the Devil's Den that night that they were partying, looking for Julie. So they got separated at some point in that night, and Freddie Burns and the 2 other kids were picking on him and stole his bike, and Will ran off, and they didn't see him since then. So that's why Freddie Burns' prints were on the bike, because he was riding it. But he said he hadn't seen.
Yeah, and he said Will was there. He said he was looking for his sister.
Yeah, yeah.
I think this happened a little bit before they actually go talk to kids, but there was this little scene of Woodard. He was picking up trash, and he's in a field speaking to these two girls, asking them for their cans of soda or whatever.
Yeah.
But the imagery isn't great. I mean, he's in the open field just talking to these two like 12-year-old girls. So that guy, one of the guys who threatened him in the last episode, sees him out the window and immediately like gets on the phone. So he's getting his crew together.
Yeah.
Which
and then,
we'll see later, but.
Also, still in the 80s, Amelia goes and drops off.
This was another scene, though. It's just, I don't know.
Oh, I got a lot from this scene. Amelia goes and drops off a box full of the kids' stuff that she had from school, like drawings that they did at school. And Lucy, the mother, lets her come in, and Lucy's clearly drunk.
Yeah.
And Amelia tries to get her to talk. She's like, "You can trust me." And then all of a sudden she starts crying and basically using Amelia as some sort of confession. She says, "I have the soul of a whore." She said her kids were super unhappy. She never saw them laugh. She mentions killing herself. And then she starts crying. She said, "I've done such a terrible thing. God, forgive me. I've done such a terrible thing." And then at that point, Amelia says, "You should talk to Hayes. You can trust Hayes." And then Lucy kind of like sobers up and flips on her, like, "Oh, are you chummy with the police? Like, why do you," like, screams at her, and then Amelia goes out of the house.
She took it as her, like, accusing her of doing something to the kids. But.
So, I mean, she feels guilty about something.
Yeah. We just don't know what.
We don't know what yet. Yeah.
Probably, well, if I were to venture a guess, bringing that Uncle Dan.
Yeah, I bet she probably knows that Uncle Dan did something.
Yeah. Or that he wasn't really Uncle Dan. He was just
maybe
that guy.
Julie's father.
Saying, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then it goes to the 90s, and Hayes is watching the surveillance footage from Walgreens, and you see
he's
Julie,
looking. They kind of go back and forth to this every now and then
because he's watching
clearly
hours
watching it
of
like hours, and he finally finds her in video.
Yeah, and she looks straight up at the camera too.
Yeah.
So now we're in 2015. He's talking into his recording again because he's going over the case. But at this point, we know older Hayes, and maybe even the 90s Hayes, has a lot of memory issues.
He's having these like
visions. Like in the last episode, he saw his wife.
Now he sees all these Vietnamese soldiers coming up behind him.
And
the weird thing was one guy in a suit.
Yeah, one random like lawyer.
Yeah, he looked like a lawyer or a cop or somebody. Just one dude in a suit amongst the Vietnamese soldiers.
Yeah.
Which was weird. But he looks out his window and sees a suspicious car, and he thinks somebody's watching him. So we'll see if they touch on that. I don't
Yeah.
know.
But he mentions, he's like, "I need to tell Rowan about O'Brien's remains."
Yeah.
Yeah. So he thinks
he's still trying to find Rowan.
Yeah. We haven't seen Rowan in 2015 yet.
Still no. So now, kind of wrapping up, you're going back to the 80s. I have the order right. Woodard. Woodard's walking down the road. He sees these cars coming after him, and then he starts running. He takes his shoes off and just starts running.
Yeah.
And he runs to his house, and now the duffel bag that we saw in the last episode, he runs to it, he opens it, and it's just all these guns. All these military.
It's so weird because it looked so much like a body.
And clearly, they went for that.
Yeah.
And so he gets all these guns ready. He sets up his house, and he's got
some
a
sort
trip
of trap.
He's got a mine,
yeah,
set up on his front door, and it's that old thing, front door enemy. Which
yeah. So all those guys come to his place, and they start like, "Come out! Like, we're gonna kick your ass," basically. And it cuts back to Hayes and West interrogating the teenagers.
Yeah.
But detective comes and says that they've got a call that something's happening at Woodard's house.
Happening with Woodard, so they start just racing down there.
Yeah.
And this mob is out there.
Yeah.
Screaming, and then they go break down his door.
The last thing you see is they break down the door, and the whole thing explodes.
Well,
there's just an explosion.
Like the explosion is just a fade to black.
Yeah.
It was like
it's
the
an
end of the
explosion. You don't know what blew up. Yeah. It was like a Sopranos episode.
Well, it was like that, the finale of Sopranos. It just cut to black. I know you never watched it, but That was the big thing. And I was like, are you kidding me? They just pulled Sopranos.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just completely cuts it black.
So there's some sort of explosion, and then that's the end of the episode.
Yeah. So Woodard was clearly ready for this. He was armed and ready. And we'll see what comes of this.
If he blew up his house, he clearly blew up everybody. There's a possibility he's dead, which means that he wouldn't be one of the guys we thought might have been falsely accused or false imprisonment. Yeah. So
I like the line he had where it said "front toward enemy." It reminded me of Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec. He just has that on his desk, front toward enemy, just facing out to whoever tries to talk to him.
And he's like, "Is this real?" And you're like, "Yeah." Does it work? I don't know. Maybe. Thank you for watching, and look out for episode 5. It's coming soon. And then we'll be all caught up. Yeah. And leave a comment, some theories that you have, or just some notes that we pressed on that you have something to add to. We love to read your comments. The more feedback, the better. Yeah. Hope you guys are enjoying. Thanks. We're looking forward to episode 5.
See